Welcome, everyone. My name is Christina Jackson. I'm the Deputy Director of Washington Council of Lawyers. We are a voluntary bar association here in DC who support and encourage public interest law and pro bono. We have been thrilled to host DC Pro Bono Week since 2013, and we have a great slate of programs during the week. In addition, we have affiliated training, so if you've been inspired to take on a pro bono case and you need a skills refresher, if you look on our website under Pro Bono Week, you will see a list of affiliated trainings so that you can get those skills up and you're able to take on a case. We have a couple more programs this week, and then we will wrap up Pro Bono Week on Saturday. If you are interested in those programs, you can check out our website. In addition, we have recaps and additional resources, and we'll have recordings once we do the week wrap up on our Pro Bono Publico blog. And if you want to be part of the conversation or check out our tips and strategies or some of the things that we've discussed this week, just check out our social media. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn using the hashtag DC Pro Bono 20. I am very excited to be part of the ABA celebration of pro bono, which is a nationwide celebration, and we are thrilled that we are a small part of it. We are also very excited that the ABA supports our programs, and we have today the ABA president, Patricia Lee Rifo. Trish is the ABA president for this year, and she has graced us with a few comments. So I'm going to turn it over to Trish now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you today to celebrate DC Pro Bono Week. I'm saying hello from Phoenix, Arizona, which is where I practice, but I grew up in Alexandria, so I'm a little bit of a DC hometown girl anyway. If there are two things that the ABA embodies, it is working for racial justice and pro bono work. And so this particular program is a fabulous combination of two of the most important things that the American Bar Association stands for. This is the 12th annual celebration of pro bono that we have organized, and there have been thousands and thousands of events and organizations across the country over those years to celebrate the work that pro bono lawyers do to help those in need in our country. Right now, I don't need to tell you how desperate the legal needs are, particularly in our communities of color. The pandemic has had, again, as you know better than I, a disproportionate impact on all of our communities of color. And this work today is about trying to address those inequities in the context of celebrating the pro bono work that lawyers across the country do all day, every day. I am so proud of all of you for what you are doing. As I was looking at the list of names and organizations that you were typing into your chat, it's a little bit of a who's who of folks in the DC area who spend so much time and energy working on these important issues. So thank you for all you do on behalf of all of the lawyers in America. And thank you particularly to the Washington Council of Lawyers for your leadership in this space. So have a great program, and thank you so much for the chance to say hello.
Thank you, Trish. Coming from Alexandria, you're definitely a DC girl. We count you. I am now going to turn our program over to Harmony Jones, who is the Deputy Pro Bono Counsel for Steptoe. She's going to be moderating our discussion, and she will introduce our panelists to you. Thank you, Harmony.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Trish, for those remarks. And I'd also like to thank the Washington Council of Lawyers for hosting this event. Like Christina said, I'm Harmony Jones, Deputy Pro Bono Counsel at Steptoe. Thank you all for joining us today. Now I'd like to give you a quick overview of today's panel and introduce you to our panelists. After the panelists speak, we will have time for Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll take as many as we can at the end. This summer, in the midst of a global pandemic, we all watched in collective outrage as many tragic events unfolded. including the police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many others. We then watched and joined in protests that unfolded in Minneapolis, DC, and in cities and small towns around the country and around the world. This summer seemed to be a turning point for many to recognize the systematic inequality that pervades our legal system. But for some of us, like the members of this panel, who have dedicated their careers to fighting racial injustice, this came as no surprise. And for some people, like my father, who grew up in DC and graduated from Ballou High School without learning how to read or write, he eventually learned in prison, or people like my brothers who have had one too many unfair and unjust encounters with the police and the criminal justice system, this was certainly not new information. But the good news is that now many more of us are asking what we can do to confront the racial injustice in our society, and particularly in our legal system. And if we're listening to each other and to those who have been doing this work, and we're guided by those who have been living with the effects of injustice and inequality for their entire lives, we can really make a difference. Today's panelists will give you an insight into the great work that they've been doing to fight racial inequality, and let you know how you can get involved in pro bono work that will help ensure justice and equality for all. Today, you will hear from Joanna Perales. Joanna is an attorney with the Federal Public Defender's Office in DC, where she works on compassionate release cases. Joanna has been with the Federal Public Defenders for 4.5 years, working on post-conviction issues. You'll also hear from Ernest Boykin. Ernest is a DC native and a criminal justice reform advocate. He was serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison when the COVID pandemic began to hit prisons hard. He has underlying medical conditions that put him at high risk if he contracted the disease, and the conditions inside the prison were deteriorating by the day. His case was accepted by the Compassionate Release Project, and he was represented by Joanna. He was granted compassionate release in July 2020. Nora Ahmed is the legal director at the ACLU of Louisiana, where she leads the Justice Lab, Putting Racist Policing on Trial project. This is an intensive litigation effort to challenge racially discriminatory police practices and combat police violence against people of color. Marcus Banks leads Law for Black Lives DC and helped create the Black Movement Law Project, an organization providing legal support to the activists and organizations for the movement for Black lives. He has organized and trained legal support in various cities across the nation. And Jamila Johnson. Jamila is the managing attorney for the Unanimous Jury Project. She focuses her work on helping people heal after a 138-year-old Jim Crow era law eroded the dignity and fairness of Louisiana's criminal justice system. She does so using litigation, policy, and public education. Jamila also served on the steering committee for the Unanimous Jury Coalition as it ran the campaign to amend the Louisiana Constitution to require unanimous juries. Now I will turn it over to our panelists, Joanna and Ernest.
Thank you so much, Harmony. Good afternoon. I think you're all going to want to hear from Mr. Boykin, so I'm going to keep my thoughts short. So I had the great luck of being referred Mr. Boykin's case from FAM's Compassionate Release Clearinghouse at the end of April. Like other referrals and clients who contact me, I put it on my long and growing list. I think that list at one point was 70 clients. But Mr. Boykin is not like other clients. He is persistent and dogged. And he's also just a really good person, which you're going to hear from his voice when you hear from him. So he was never far from my mind. I knew that he had multiple health conditions that raised his risk. I knew that he was a Black man in prison and that COVID-19 strikes people of color and men, and those in prison especially hard. I was worried about him. But he had also done less than 40% of a 15-year sentence for drug and gun crimes, just over 40% when you factor in good time. And I thought, what are the chances that this is going to get granted? But throughout the months that we worked together, I felt a glimmer of hope growing. It was tempered, of course, by you just never know. You never know what is going to happen. But his motion was granted and Mr. Boykin is out. So Mr. Boykin and I wanted to bring you into our work together to give you some sense of what a working relationship with those who are in prison is like, and some tips for those who are non-people of color in our quest to be better allies and advocates alongside those who are in prison who are people of color. First, some of this comes down to perspective and not to specific things that I did or that I said. I approach these cases thinking that this is something my clients deserve. There was actually an attorney general in Massachusetts who herself said that although some people have made terrible choices or engaged in reprehensible behavior, the sentence they received for their crime did not include contracting COVID-19 and death. And I firmly believe that. And so when I meet or hear from my clients, I come from the perspective that what I'm going to do is their right. And because of that perspective, it's actually my job and not theirs. It's my job to gain their trust. And so here I am. They've never met me. They're not going to see me. Mr. Boykin and I saw each other for the first time on one of these calls many months after we had first spoken. And so the question is, how can I gain that trust? And this is actually something that was very surprising to me. Even though I've done this work for quite some time, post-conviction work for quite some time, the pandemic was actually very freeing to me. So I'm working from home and I don't have an office door. I don't have a desk that's routing my calls. I actually use my personal cell phone for work because we don't, for a government agency, we're not given personal cell phones for this. And so without me even meaning it, my clients are hearing my kids scream. They're hearing slammed doors. Once Mr. Boykin was on the call, and we were on a call together, and he heard my younger son come screaming because he got a cut. Now, I told him to go talk to his dad and that I was on a call with a client. But what it made me realize this whole experience is I'm not sure why I've been keeping those strictures and those doors so closed to clients in the first place. I'm not sure what the purpose was. And so I'm not saying to bare your soul to your clients. That's not what they need from us. But what it does mean is that it's made me realize that me being a human and being more open and less removed has allowed for a greater connection to my clients. And that cell phone I told you about, that actually has been remarkable for me because it has allowed clients' families to contact me and to write me at all times of day and night. And that can sometimes be hard, but what it means is when I'm in the middle of emotion, I can actually ask them as well, what happened here? What's this condition? Can you ask your family member in prison what is going on? And that segues into another issue that another approach that I've found helpful. So another way that I've tried to gain trust is through listening. So I do that by asking detailed questions from my clients about what it feels like to be in prison right now. I then include in my motions a section on my client's lived experience at his prison during the lockdown. I get very specific. I say, when did you first go into lockdown? How many hours are you in your cell? How many others are in your unit? Do you have a roommate? Are your medications delivered on time? Has your temperature been taken? Many and detailed questions that then I include as a section in the motion. And what I've heard from clients is that's incredibly meaningful. It's not that I don't actually know whether judges care, but that's not always the point. I've heard from my clients that they receive that motion and they see, oh, wow, she was actually listening to me. And that is very meaningful then to me that they feel that. So now the person who experienced all of this in real time and who can help us understand Mr. Boykin. Mr. Boykin, I wanted to see if you wanted to begin by telling us what it felt like in prison at the start of the pandemic, and then anything else you wanted to tell us about your case.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate these type of opportunities to talk about my experience and my experience in prison and my experience working with Joanna and the whole fam thing. When people hear that you had 15 years and things like that, the first thing that they think about is, oh man, this guy had 15 years. He must have did something really bad. But as attorneys, I'm sure, as criminal attorneys, I'm sure that you've seen people get a lot of time for stuff that is sometimes not even really that bad. And that's where the system is kind of messed up. Um, I admit that, I did some things that I had no business doing because I had opportunities in front of me. I was educated. I did know my dad. Like I wasn't the typical person who, you may hear about going to prison from that standpoint. But being on the other side, there are a lot of people that have both of their parents. There are a lot of people who have education. There are a lot of people who are good parents to their children, and they fall on bad times. And, the person who goes to prison isn't the only one affected by these type of situations. The children are affected, the community is affected, parents are affected. There's a lot of people who are affected. And when I was watching CNN and I learned about COVID, it freaked me out, because I felt helpless. And that's a feeling that people in prison experience daily. You can't do anything for your family. You can't, and especially most people who are in for like drug crimes and stuff. A lot of people are not just selling drugs just to buy clothes and cars and things like that. A lot of people in my community are selling drugs as a form of occupation. They do it just like a job. And everybody's not out there trying to hurt somebody physically. A lot of people not out there forcing drugs on people. Some of these people, they're doing this to sustain a lifestyle and trying to achieve the American dream. And that doesn't necessarily justify it, but what it does do is it. I just want people to understand that anybody can go to prison. You can have a bad day. You could sign a document that you had no business signing at work, and next thing you know, you're caught up in something crazy that you had no even intention on getting involved in. You could go out for drinks after you win a case, and next thing you know, you crash your car into somebody dies, and next thing you know, you got 10 years just like that, and you didn't really intentionally do anything to get it. So I don't try to judge people for what they've done because I'm not in their shoes. And, I do understand that when you go to prison, you have a helpless feeling. You can't do anything to help your parents when they're aging and they're struggling to survive off of Social Security income, or they're struggling to survive off their pensions because the cost of living has gone up so much. And to hear that this COVID thing was reaching out and touching elderly people, it really had me really worried that, hey, I could really lose my parents while I'm in prison. I wasn't even thinking about myself at first. And that was the thing. Or Black Lives Matter is going on and it's basically a war between the minority communities and the cops out there. So it's like, oh, what can I do to try to shield my children from getting wrapped up in this? I don't want to get a call saying that my son was killed by the cops and stuff like that. So I was left with an extremely helpless feeling. And once I saw that the CDC had deemed people like me who have asthma or people who have high blood pressure or diabetes, things like that, as high risk, panic set in, okay? Because I'm like, hold on. I already had to deal with the fact that I may not make it to graduation for my daughter. I may not make it to see my son play a basketball game or football game in college. And I may not make it out before my parents pass away from old age. I had to accept all those things when I accepted my sentence. And for COVID to set in, it was just really, really terrifying because all of those realities were accelerated. I felt like, I could actually lose my life in prison because prison is a filthy environment. People barely have enough supplies to clean the facility on a normal day. So for them to have to clean maybe 10 to 15 times more in a normal day or hourly, um, and the budgets that these facilities are given are not just miraculously increased because of COVID. It put me in a really sticky situation. So I was fortunate enough that I had support, family support, and they made contact with FAM. And when they contacted FAM, FAM put my family and myself in touch with Joanna, and that's when our relationship was born. You know, it just was simple as that. It was like, you know, I believed in the system. A lot of people who are in the system don't believe in the system. I believe that, you know, this was my opportunity, because you have to realize people, when they get sentenced, they try to appeal. And if you're coming out of the Fourth Circuit, you're probably not going to win on appeal, you know, because that's just the reality of the situation. And so then you got all these laws that are changing. So people are hoping that this law applies to me so that I can get a time reduction. And then you got people who are cooperating with the authorities that are trying to get out. So there's all kinds of situations and variables that come into play from the perspective of a person who is incarcerated. And when this COVID thing hit, it was like a gift and a curse, because it was just another loophole for me to find my way out of prison. And I was fortunate enough, I was blessed enough for it to work out in my favor. And, you know, I appreciate it.
Mr. Boykin, what do you think worked between you and me as an attorney on the outside, an attorney who you didn't know? And then what do you think those attorneys who are non-people of color, what can they do to gain the trust of those inside who may have had pretty crappy experiences in the past?
I'm gonna be completely honest with you. Like, the lawyer who I took my plea with, I paid him $30,000 and I got 15 years. And the first thing that allowed me to establish trust with Joanna was that she said, because I was telling her, I was like, listen, I only got one shot at this. The lawyer who I took my plea with, he's a well-known attorney. He's probably ranked number 1 or 2 in DC on criminal defense. He wants $5,000. And she said, hold up, don't pay him. Do not pay him. I'm gonna work your case. And it really shocked me, like, hold on, don't pay him? Well, do you want me to pay you? She's like, no, I'm just gonna do this. This is what we do. I have some experience in this. And yes, she was 100% honest. I heard the kids in the background. She had to put me on hold, things like that. But those things allowed me to see that she wasn't just an attorney. She was a person, you know, so those things kind of helped me out too. What ended up happening was I kind of lost trust for attorneys after I paid this lawyer all this money. And you know, I know the sentencing guidelines are what they are. And I knew all this going into it, but I could have probably got the same plea for free if I just used a public defender, because I didn't have any legitimate income or anything like that. So it just made me feel like, you know what, why not? What do I have to lose? So when we start our relationship, I feel that Joanna spent an appropriate amount of time on her opening, her establishing a relationship with me by, you know, hey, I got kids. Sorry, you might hear this going on in the background. Do you have kids? Okay, right. You know, tell me about the facility that you're at. Tell me about your experience. Blah blah blah. She went through a series of questions, and I didn't know at the time this was going to be the template that she was going to use to break the ice with all of her clients. But I don't even think she did. We just instantly clicked. And I want to let everybody know that that's not normal. Like, you don't always meet a person who can articulate themselves when you're dealing with people in the situation that I was in. You know, some of these people don't have GEDs. Some of these people don't know how to read, like Harmony was saying about her dad. Like, you know, you never know what you're gonna get. So the best thing to do as an attorney, I feel, is to go in without any preconceived notions or any, prejudices. I just think that you should try to represent your clients like you're representing one of your family members. Like, just give them the same treatment that you would give your uncle, your nephew, or something like that. And if you treat them like that, it will be a service to not only them, but it'll be a service to you, because you will be able to extract much more information that you can use in your briefs, your motions, and even in any of your arguments that you're gonna make. So.
Thank you so much, Mr. Boykin, and thank you, Joanna. I think it's so important to hear from clients and people in your perspective, from your perspective, what makes an effective attorney, and we don't hear your voice enough. So thank you for sharing that inspiring testimony with us. And I will just drop in here that if you want to get involved, there are plenty more people like Mr. Boykin that need your representation, and you can go to crclearinghouse.org to get signed up to start taking these cases. And now I will turn it over to Nora.
Thank you so much, Harmony. It doesn't look like I can get my video started, but I will begin, and if my video appears, then we'll take it from there. We just had a hurricane in New Orleans, so we're having a few issues on our end. But I wanted to come here today and talk to you all about an initiative that the ACLU of Louisiana launched in June of 2020. And let's see if this video works. Okay, all right. And the name of our initiative is Justice Lab, Putting Racist Policing on Trial. And Justice Lab was launched as a pilot program in a state that unfortunately epitomizes everything that's broken with our system of policing. If Louisiana were a country, it would have the highest incarceration rate in the world. And that shouldn't really come as a surprise, because if we look at all 50 states, Louisiana has the highest ratio of police officers to residents. And when we look at the data, what we see in this state, as in many other states, is Black people being disproportionately targeted, arrested, jailed, and killed by the officers sworn to protect and serve them. So with Justice Lab, we are aiming to fill a gap. And I want to tell everyone on this call who comes from a private firm, that gap was inspired by the statements that many of you put out into the ether, indicating that you actually wanted to get involved in solving problems related to policing. And what we have known for a long time is, while there are incredible civil rights attorneys that bring Section 1983 claims, they still have to feed themselves and run law firms. So they cannot take on all of the cases that don't result in severe maiming or death. And that's why, of course, as everyone started sharing on social media, after the George Floyd protests continued on and on, we started learning as a country what most of us knew, that getting stopped by police happens every day for people of color. It happens multiple times in a year, and oftentimes folks get away without being maimed or killed, but many times they don't. And so we wanted to create a program where we started targeting those situations where people were not necessarily being brutalized or killed, but those were the indications of a problem with our policing structure if we allow unconstitutional stops, seizures, and searches to continue. So that really is where all of you come into the scheme. So we went about and we said, can we get all of these law firms that are making these statements, that have an interest in policing, on board with this initiative? And to date, we have 40 law firms on board who are interested in working with us in the state of Louisiana to prosecute these very types of cases. And our goal is that if we can start to see change through the innovative strategies that we are going to work on with our law firm partners, that we have incredible legal scholars coming in and teaching, that we might be able to set up a paradigm that can be replicated in other states. So just so all of you get a sense of what's going on right now. Our first law firm cohort was trained in August, and we started giving them cases, the run-of-the-mill unconstitutional cases that I talked to you about, stops, searches, seizures, excessive force where it exists. And those law firms are now investigating those cases in further detail with us. And our second cohort was just trained up last week, and they're finishing their training this week. And so in addition to training, you don't have to worry about going through the intake process. Many law firm clients are intake volunteers with Justice Lab. So they take aside 10 to 15 hours of their week to speak with prospective claimants, to talk to others in their family who may have witnessed an incident, and they put together a comprehensive memo that we at the ACLU of Louisiana then review. And we then have to make a determination about whether that memo gets to go to a law firm for further investigation, or whether that's a case we move to our storytelling initiative. And I'll tell you, the difference between the cases that go to law firms and don't, it's not really the type of claim, it's the statute of limitations. In Louisiana, it's one of less than a handful of states that have a 1-year statute of limitations for bringing a civil rights claim under Section 1983. So we are trying also legislatively and with other reforms to show through the stories that we tell and amplify with the consent of our storytellers that we have a problem. And this is something we all have to bear in mind. If you are subject to unconstitutional policing, more often than not, you're likely going to be arrested if you survive the encounter. And when you're in jail, if you don't have money, you're given a public defender who knows how to do the criminal side of your case, but can't necessarily start thinking about that civil side. And so as you're in jail, thinking about bail in your criminal case, that statute of limitations is running on your civil case. So those are the kinds of cases that we are working on the ground to get before those claims run. And that's what we're hoping we can partner with those of you on the line who might be interested in working on these cases. So I want to thank everyone, and thank you, Harmony, for inviting me to come and talk to you all about the project that we started regarding policing.
Thank you so much, Nora. It's really amazing work that you're doing down there, and there's such a need. And also thank you for joining us in the middle of a hurricane. Now I'm going to turn it over to Marcus Banks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. As I'm sitting here thinking about sort of racial justice and how do we move the ball forward, one thing that thinks about me, and when we're sort of having this panel and figuring out the role of lawyers, I sit back and sort of take a history lesson, or think of history of where we sort of came from, and that most of the strives that push for like the strives that we've had in racial justice, it wasn't the lawyers that were moving the ball on that. It was the organizers and the movements on the ground who really take the lead. We're talking about policing again in such a wide range of looking at like what role do police play. It wasn't because of the lawyers. It wasn't because of us. It was because of the people on the ground that continue to rise up daily. And so I say that because of the organization that I'm a part of, Law for Black Lives DC. It's a volunteer-based organization. So like for all of us within that organization, it's not our day jobs. We do, so many other things around it, but our goal is to seek to eradicate white supremacy and anti-Blackness by leveraging our collective skills and experiences as lawyers, legal professions, and Black people to support Black-led community efforts in the struggle for liberation and justice in the metropolitan Washington, DC area. And so I think there's so many works being done, and you've heard some of these great efforts on this panel already. And one of the things that Law for Black Lives DC really focuses on or wants to push forward is that since we will not necessarily be the change, our goal is to open up space for those people that will make the change. And so what does that look like? And that has built up in many different areas, because policing is a racial justice issue, which is connected to housing, which is a racial justice issue, which is connected to economics, which is a racial justice issue, to education, to environment. Like, all of these things are connected, and it's going to take a wide grassroots movement and mobilization to push that forward. And so for us, when we see people rise up and there's repression that comes down from the state based on that, and we've already started to see it now. We've seen how these protests have been, the police response that has happened to protesters over the summer. As we're talking about a policing issue, the response by the police is not that, okay, we need to take a look at how our nation, deals with policing. It was showing you that this is a police state. And so organizers who are moving for all of these other issues and who are working on wide range, one of the things we focus on, and I'm talking about it because there's so many projects. I mean, in my day job, I work at the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs, who work on policing cases and housing cases. But I want to take time to focus on the people on the ground and push, and how helping them is a racial justice issue that actually moves the ball just as far as taking on some of these cases. Because movements have been, like I mentioned, met with repression, have been dismantled through COINTELPRO, through so much. And there were so many times when looking back in history where there just weren't enough lawyers to respond to what the movement was going through. So one of the things that we've been doing, especially in the summer and the height of protests, and for people in DC, just thinking about the response that may happen during the week of election when protests are scheduled, and you have people that are facing some things as curfew violations or assault on a police officer, which is a case that where a lot of people are arrested for, even when they never even touched the officer. But something as small as doing criminal defense on some of those, or pro bono on some of those cases, to as big as you have, protesters and organizers being looked at, or through the surveillance of the police, and also looking at some of these larger charges that can even be talked about, which is a fear that a lot of organizers are thinking about. It's like federal conspiracy charges, just thinking about that. So looking for people to partner with who focus on some of those lower level things to the higher end, especially that organizations are facing. So Law for Black Lives DC has done, legal observation, jail support, connecting people with criminal and civil attorneys, and figuring out the best response to make sure that we're pushing for what people are on the ground need, and creating a space for them and giving our legal expertise for that. And I think we're going to continue to see more repression, and we're going to be doing more cases. So we've partnered with a lot of organizations such as the ACLU, DC here, Washington Lawyers Committee, to do those civil cases. But what is frightening sometimes is the lack of sometimes for the criminal defense and the support that's needed there, especially once we know that that's how a quick way to dismantle movements, because once they feel like they can't continue to come out, they can't continue to organize, that the ball may be pushed even further. And you look at through history, especially in the 70s, where like the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, and so many organizations faced state repression through either they were murdered or the constant arrests and trials that they had to go through. Finding attorneys, I remember like talking to some of the original Black Panthers, of them going around begging for money to find attorneys. So there's so many different ways that we can step up. And the other point that I would want to mention, especially with law firm resources and people in this space, is also taking the time and partnering with organizations like Law for Black Lives DC or different stuff, like the importance of mentoring Black and people of color, like those lawyers, and building them up so they can also be key players in this space as well.
Thank you so much, Marcus. I think it's really important, and I'm glad that you shared your voice with us, that we just are following, Black-led community movement as lawyers, and looking to you to sort of lead the way and what it would be most helpful for us. So thank you for sharing that. Now I will turn it over to Jamila Johnson.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm also in New Orleans, so if you hear sounds like broken glass or tree removal, there's all kinds of things happening to try to deal with last night's storm around the building. So I apologize in advance. I can't control the sound around me right now. As Harmony mentioned, I am the managing attorney at the Promise of Justice Initiative, running the Jim Crow Jury's Unanimous Jury Project. I have the honor of being able to wake up every day and try to help the state of Louisiana heal from more than a century of the impacts and harms created by a Jim Crow law. And I get to spend a lot of my time thinking about how do you do that and how do you do it responsibly, and where has the country excelled and where has the country really failed people in that healing process. But I also have the joy and the honor of working with more than 1,600 incarcerated people in the state of Louisiana who were convicted with unconstitutional Jim Crow juries verdicts. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that project. We presently have 56 law firms who have active cases on our Jim Crow juries project, with more than 500 lawyers and 15 partner in-house organizations. We still need to find placements for another 200 cases from law firms by probably in the next 2 months, if we are going to be able to preserve the rights for the incarcerated folks who I'm going to talk a little bit about. And so as you listen to a little bit about the project, think whether this is a project that you and your organization might be able to participate in. So what is a Jim Crow jury? In the state of Louisiana and also in the state of Oregon, you could be convicted when not all of the jurors on your jury found that the prosecution had proved beyond a reasonable doubt that you were guilty. And a lot of folks assumed that that came from Louisiana being a quirky place where there was Spanish influence and French influence and just things are strange down here. But in fact, that's not how Jim Crow juries came to be. If we go back to the time of the Civil War, prior to the Civil War, more than half of the state of Louisiana was enslaved. And after the Civil War, as people started to try to build lives out of enslavement, the state of Louisiana really made that difficult. They enforced black codes that would result in people's arrest and conviction for not having stable employment or stable housing after slavery. And throughout the state of Louisiana, you saw this increased use of convict leasing and plantations being purchased and associated together, and taking those people who were being charged with the black code violations and sending them back for indentured servitude at a plantation called Angola. By 1898, the state of Louisiana had a incredible amount of violence around voting rights, had these black code issues, had all of this tension, and the state legislature called for a constitutional convention. And at that constitutional convention, a group of all white delegates gathered together, and their explicit purpose was to ensure the supremacy of the white race to the greatest extent permissible under law. And they made changes to the voting system. And when they made those changes to the voting system, they put in all of the very classic Jim Crow regulations that you know about. At the time, there were 130,000 registered Black voters in the state of Louisiana. By 1922, that number was only 598. That's how successful this constitutional convention was. But they also did work in the area of jury rights. And they put in place a jury system that would make it so that if you were lucky enough to find your way onto a jury as a Black Louisianan, the requirement that 2 or 3 of your jurors' voices would be silenced would make it so that Black Louisianans had no votes on a jury. As Justice Kavanaugh explained in his concurring opinion in the recent Ramos decision, it was also explicitly for the purpose of convicting more Black Louisianans and bringing them further into this system. In April, our client Evangelista Ramos went to the US Supreme Court, and the US Supreme Court found the non-unanimous jury practice in Louisiana to be unconstitutional. And they explicitly talked about the racist beginnings and the purposes and how for more than 120 years, Louisiana's justice system has been fundamentally altered by this racist practice. And when we look through the country's history, we often see that when we're addressing Jim Crow laws, we do a couple of things. One thing we do is like we change the law. Great, that's a good thing. The second thing we do is that we say that the law originally was racist. And I feel like the Ramos decision from the US Supreme Court in April really did that. But the thing that we fail the most at is seeing who is currently carrying the weight of these past practices. And when it comes to the Jim Crow jury issue, the people carrying that weight are the 1,600 people in Louisiana's prisons who did not get relief directly from Ramos, who are incarcerated with convictions that they heard the US Supreme Court say were unconstitutional. They heard the US Supreme Court say were based on racism and were explicitly Jim Crow practices. And for our clients, more than 60% of whom are serving life without the possibility of parole with these unconstitutional convictions, they have 1 year, and that 1 year expires in April, to file a post-conviction relief application and argue for retroactivity. The US Supreme Court will be hearing a case on retroactivity, but the Louisiana post-conviction process makes it so that if they don't file something in this window of time, they may never be able to get any remedy from the US Supreme Court decision that's coming ahead. So we are on a clock. We're on a clock with, I think this was our fifth possible hurricane to hit the state of Louisiana this year, the first to hit New Orleans. But our court systems have been really impacted by that. We have COVID issues. We have all of these barriers to getting records, and there is really a race against the clock. We co-counsel with any volunteers. We have extensive training, 185 pages of written documentation for your joy and reading. I'm verse, as I think you can see from this conversation, and video trainings as well. A number of folks who have gone through this process and have done their filings already, who can give you guidance and video and access to professionals doing this sort of work around the country. So if you're interested in this project, I'm going to put my email address into the chat window. And I'm also going to just ask for a little bit of grace. I am actually the only person on my team right now with working power after yesterday's storm. So it might take me a couple of days to get back to you, but we really, really could use all the help we can get.
Thank you so much, Jamila. That was such important work, and we really appreciate it. And it sounds like it's very urgent as well. So we hope that many of you will get involved. And that's really the main point of this panel. We want to hear about racial justice issues, but more importantly, I think that many of you who joined want to actually get involved and help. So I'm just going to open it up for question and answer. You can put your Q&As in the Q&A box. And in the meantime, I just want to ask the panelists, I know Jamila just shared that, how folks can get involved in your work. And if you're outside of DC, whether or not there are opportunities to do it remotely. So Marcus, if you want to start us out on how to get involved.
Yeah, for Law for Black Lives DC, there's a few different programmings that we have specifically coming up. So for those of you that are in DC and DC barred, over in the summer of the protest, when the curfew was in place, about 300 people were arrested for curfew violations. Through the efforts of grassroots movements and, at different advocacy, we were able to convince the Office of Attorney General to drop those cases, to not go forward with prosecution on those cases. But we also are working on sort of expunging or sealing those records, because we know the collateral consequences of arrest records of the criminal system, and so want to help people out. So we're going to have information about that for different ways that attorneys can plug in to help with that clinic, so we can get support for those people. We also have an ongoing sort of just resource list of people that we can sort of reach out to for different situations, because the way that Law for Black Lives is set up is that our core partners are Black-led organizations who are organizing within the community. So oftentimes we'll hear about requests like, oh, this is what happened. Is there someone that can take on this policing case? Or we need a criminal defense attorney to work on this, or, you know, someone's facing this housing issue and their landlord, or they feel like their landlord is discriminating against them. And so we'll push that out to the people that the law firms, attorneys that we partner with to figure out, you know, if there's someone that can take on that on that issue.
Thank you, Marcus. Nora, I see a question about the Justice Lab project. Is that something that people can do from DC, and how can you get involved? It's possible that we may have. Oh.
Hey, Nora, I think you're on mute.
It's also possible that she's having other issues. So, oh.
Can you all hear me? I apologize.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. My apologies, Harmony. So yes. Okay. So folks can get involved in the ACLU of Louisiana's Justice Lab. We actually are looking for out-of-state lawyers because Louisiana is actually a place where you've got a few private attorneys who are very brave in bringing cases against the police, but we definitely don't have enough who are able to take on cases that go against police officers. So it's actually by design in part that we are going to need the help from all of you. And yes, this is work that can be done remotely. We are working to build out our community consulting expert program, where we have organizers that Marcus was talking about. They have groups of folks who they work with. Some of them have programs where they work with formerly incarcerated people. Others just have groups where they're working with Black communities. We are working to partner them as consulting experts with our law firms on the ground so that we ensure that our litigation is actually geared towards that which the community needs. So we are not looking to try these cases in isolation. And most importantly, we're looking to set up that paradigm so a program like this can be rolled out in other states. So we're looking to enter into common interest agreements across various clients so that we can actually start sharing discovery and identifying those strategies that will allow us to take on the cases in the way that we need to in the state. Because again, as Jamila said, getting information from police in this state is actually quite difficult. And the way that we're going to be able to successfully bring cases that challenge the illicit pattern and practices, it's going to be via information and discovery sharing while we're doing that kind of work with the community, as they're the ones who know exactly what's wrong. So if anybody on this call can email us at Justice Lab, so just JUSTICELAB at LAACLU.org, and we're happy to send along all of the written information that describes the program and talk you through the training process and any other questions that anyone here might have.
Thank you so much, Nora. I also wanted to mention, I don't know if Joanna would have anything else to say about getting involved in the Compassionate Release Project, but there is a link in the chat, and Christina has put a lot of links about getting involved in all the different projects in the chat. There is definitely a real need, and so like I said, you can go to crclearinghouse.org. We have some attorneys at Steptoe who are taking these cases, and I will tell you there's excellent training programs. That's how I first saw Mr. Boykin's story, and there are lots of other training programs and materials that really will support you along the way. So I would encourage you to get involved in that as well.
Yes, I have nothing else to add except that, of course, you can reach out and ask questions of me. I have private attorneys who've done that many times, and it's just, I'll put my email in the chat, and then you can ask questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Yes, Jamila, do you want to add anything about getting involved or otherwise?
I did notice that there are some folks from different types of organizations. And so I just wanted to say, like, we have partners who are in like the federal government who can't necessarily take on a case, but they can help summarize cases and do research for us. And we will make projects for folks who might not be in a spot to take on an attorney-client relationship. And so for people who can take on a client, you would be co-counsel with us. We go through the ProHawk process, and 98% of our volunteers are out of state. But for other organizations and folks in-house who don't feel comfortable doing it, we will work with you to design a project with your organization, because we are a very, very small but mighty team. And we are doing the best we can with a very ambitious project.
Thank you so much, Jamila. I think that's a really important point, that all of us can get involved. Lawyers, paralegals, and non-lawyers can find a way to get involved in this important work, and we need all of your help. If there are no further questions, I want to thank all the panelists. I really appreciate you joining, and I think it was a very important discussion and very practical too. And we hope that many of you on this panel viewing this will get involved, will take the next step and really get involved in whatever way that you can. It does not have to be perfect, but if we all work together and do what we can, I think that we can really make a difference. And hopefully we won't be having the same discussion 10 years from now, where we will really have made some progress. There'll always be more to do, but there's so much that can be done now. So with that, I will turn it back over to Christina to wrap us up.
How could I possibly do better than that? I do, however, want to thank Harmony and Ashley Erickson with the American Constitution Society for putting together this fantastic panel. Thank you very much, panelists, for both giving us a realistic picture as to what the need is and a way that we can reach out and help. Yes, law students absolutely can help as well, and there are lots of different ways they can get involved. And I just want to leave you with a thought that struck me, and I need to remind myself often, unfortunately, when thinking about taking on a pro bono case, that if we treat each other as people with good intentions, then I think we will be able to move the needle and get this movement to where it needs to be. So I thank you very much, panelists, for your insight and your help. And thank you all for joining us. There will be a follow-up email with these resources as well. And the recording will be part of the follow-up email so that you can come back and take notes, because I'm going to do that as well. There was a lot in this program. Thank you all very much. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.